Okay, we are now live. Lisa, take it away.
Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Lisa Carenti and I am CFAM's Executive Vice President. And together with my colleague, Stefano Generini, we will be co-hosting today's program. We would like to thank our speakers for participating today. Only with your presence could we pay proper tribute to the Trump administration's pro-woman, pro-life foreign policy legacy. So we are truly grateful for your presence here. Thank you. No one ever imagined that President Trump would spearhead the most aggressive pro-life policy agenda, both domestic and international, of any Republican administration in modern history. But that's exactly what he did. It's been 4 years of hard work by policy experts like our guests today, working within the administration to implement the president's pro-life foreign policy agenda. In 2017, shortly after being inaugurated, President Trump signed an executive order to reinstitute the Mexico City policy. He extended it to all global health. And this was necessary because abortion groups and organizations promoting and performing abortion overseas were now eligible for funding beyond just international family planning funding. They were receiving funding from HIV/AIDS programs, maternal and child health, and even water and sanitation programs. And this happened due to integration of services under the Obama administration. The expanded Mexico City policy, now called Protecting Life and Global Health Assistance, would restore the integrity of US global health assistance. It would protect vulnerable women and girls from the harm of abortion and prevent US taxpayers like you and I from being complicit in the United States becoming the world's global abortion provider. President Trump took his pro-life foreign policy agenda to multilateral fora as well. In 2019, the president went to the United Nations and he addressed the General Assembly. And there he said, Americans will never tire of protecting innocent life. And no sitting president had ever done this before. Today, we will hear from 3 amazing women, experts in their fields, who work within the Trump administration in areas that advance health and protection of women and girls in multilateral fora, in bilateral global health, and then in the Women, Peace, and Security Initiative. Before I give the floor to our panelists, I'd like to invite my colleague, Stefano Generini, to make an opening remark. Stefano is CFAM's Vice President of Legal Studies. He researches and writes on international law and policy. He advises delegates, politicians, civil society on pro-life and pro-family causes at the United Nations. Stefano.
Thank you, Lisa. And I just want to briefly just go over a few of the amazing results of the Trump administration in pro-life foreign policy, something that we've never seen before. And first of all, we saw that the administration was serious about protecting life from the very beginning, especially protecting the integrity of US foreign assistance from abortion creep. We saw this with the expansion of the Mexico City policy, as Lisa said. But then he went much further than that. For the first time, we saw a Republican administration, a pro-life administration, wanting to hold the multilateral system, UN agencies accountable for infecting international programming with abortion. And we saw this this year in particular with letters from John Barsa to the Secretary General. John Barsa is the acting director of the U.S. Agency for International Development. We saw this with the application last year of the Silgender Amendment to deny funding from the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights because they were promoting abortion. So this was unprecedented from any pro-life administration in recent history. And then we also saw efforts of the Trump administration really preserving the normative ground on pro-life issues at the United Nations, something also that's unprecedented. And the Trump administration took a tough stance in all international negotiations, ranging from the United Nations in New York to Geneva, to other multilateral forums, the Organization of American States, as well as the G20 and the G7 summit. And the Trump administration has done things that no other Republican administration has done until now, including challenging language on sexual and reproductive health, making it controversial again, making abortion controversial at the United Nations, which is so important to prevent the development of an international right to abortion. And the crowning achievement, I think, of all this was the Geneva Consensus Declaration, which really brings together a lot of these amazing results from the Trump administration. A document from 34 countries, signed by 34 countries, that affirms that abortion is not an international right, that there is no international obligation to fund abortion, that we can protect the integrity of U.S. foreign assistance and of multilateral assistance from being infected with abortion. And so for all this, I want to thank all of you, women in the Trump administration, because it has been predominantly and almost exclusively women who have done this, who have really championed the pro-life cause within the administration. And I thank you again for being here today.
Thank you, Stefano. Before we move to our first panelist, I'd just like to let our webinar audience know that we will have a Q&A segment following our third panelist. So please, if you'd like to submit questions, you can do that by submitting them through the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. And we ask that you would use the Q&A rather than the chat. I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Valerie Huber. Valerie Huber is the Special Representative for Global Women's Health at U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. From a whole of government perspective, Valerie promotes the administration's women's global health policy priorities in multilateral fora and in bilateral settings that value, promote, and empower women to thrive and achieve optimal health outcomes throughout their lives. Most recently, Valerie ushered in the Geneva Consensus Declaration through HHS and the State Department, a declaration by 33 countries that abortion is not an international right. Valerie has been involved in women's health issues at both the domestic and international levels since joining HHS in 2017. She has more than 15 years experience leading programs that advocate for and invest in the lives of children and young men and women. Valerie, welcome, you have the floor.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, CFAM, for inviting me to share the international work to protect human life here at HHS. As you probably know, HHS is an agency with 80,000 employees and an annual budget of more than $1 trillion. A budget that, if it were a nation, would put us in the top 10 in terms of budget. It should come as no surprise that most of our employees and most of our budget is focused on our domestic work to enhance the health and well-being of all Americans. But the Office of Global Affairs, or OGA, within the Office of the Secretary, is the diplomatic voice of the Department of Health and Human Services. Here, we foster critical global relationships, coordinate international engagement across all of HHS and the US government, and provide leadership and expertise in global health diplomacy and policy to contribute to a safer, healthier world. Under President Trump, we have been unapologetically protecting life here at HHS. After all, our strategic plan boldly states, and I quote, that a core component of the HHS mission is the dedication to serve all Americans from conception to natural death. So it's been an honor to serve under President Trump, who has done more to protect human life than any other president in human history, and in American history, and especially recent history. I'm reminded that few people are invited to serve in a presidential administration, and so I don't take this rare opportunity lightly. But even fewer of us can say that every day they get to work on consequential issues that are missional to who they are as a person. I'm grateful to say that I've been able to do both. Here at HHS, Secretary Azar encourages us to be strategic and courageous. He is not afraid to lead on the life issue, and he has given us freedom to be creative. In truth, I'm sobered by the reality that every day we are representing America when we speak, and the policies we craft set down a marker for posterity. As Special Representative for Global Women's Health, which is a whole of government position, it was created to focus on 4 pillars of priorities embodied in protecting life in global health policy, different from the Mexico City policy. This is an effort commissioned by Secretary Azar and with the full support of the president, specifically tasked with building a global coalition of countries to stand in solidarity on the promotion of women's health, the family as foundational to any healthy society, and the sovereign right of countries to defend innocent life through all stages of development, through their pro-life laws. Leading this effort has been one of the most gratifying responsibilities of my life. Truth be told, principled pro-life policies and providing quality health care to women and girls around the world do not conflict. We can and we are doing both things at once. Last year, 24 countries signed on to at least one joint statement with the United States at the World Health Assembly and at the United Nations, together representing more than 1 billion people. And just as Lisa said, and Stefano, just a short time ago, the culminating event for protecting life and global health policy took place. Despite overwhelming obstacles, we were able to coordinate with senior officials in many countries in order to form a coalition of countries to make the first ever commitment to work together on these 4 pillars: women's health, protecting the family as foundational to a healthy society, the protection of life, and the sovereignty of nations to make their own laws in that regard. This document, now known as the Geneva Consensus Declaration, or GCD for short, on October 22nd, Secretary Azar and Secretary Pompeo co-hosted the ceremonial signing of GCD, also led by Brazil, Egypt, Hungary, Indonesia, and Uganda, representing all the major regions of the world to take the lead on this effort, and currently co-signed now by 35 countries. More countries have added since we had that ceremonial signing. Countries now representing every single region of the world and more than 1.6 billion people. And we continue to invite additional countries to join. I invite you to go to our website at hhs.gov/declaration. You can read the declaration there, you can see what countries have joined, and you can hear Secretary Azar, Secretary Pompeo, and other world leaders talk about the importance and the significance of this historic event. But let me tell you what is so significant about GCD. First, never before has any administration created such a coalition around these issues of critical importance. Second, never before did countries not only say we agree with these pillars, but we commit to work together on these issues until we realize success. That is groundbreaking. And there are diverse nations representing different cultures, different religions, different geopolitical realities, different regions, different people groups, some agreeing on very little, but bound by these 4 core pillars. The GCD is now on the official record at the World Health Assembly, and just last week, the Secretary General at the United Nations assigned it a UN document number upon request of the United States and distributed it to all 193 member states, letting it be known that it is still open for additional co-signers. We've also selected a day on the UN calendar to memorialize GCD, to reaffirm our commitment and invite others to join. It will be on World Health Day each year, April 7th. This coalition is real. And the reality is, even when governments change, the agreement made still stands. For example, if a Biden administration were to choose to withdraw from the GCD, the most they can do is reduce the number of countries partnering from 35 to 34. The fact is that at the United Nations and elsewhere, there is an aggressive push to wrongly deem abortion as if it were a human right. This is a dangerous agenda. That's why the Geneva Consensus Declaration is so very important. It's much easier for UN agencies and other pro-abortion forces to single out individual countries, apply pressure, and then intimidate them into silence. And to those countries and agencies who are aggressively promoting abortion as if it were a human right, we invite them to engage in civil discourse and mutually agree to address women's serious health conditions, many of which are fatal. These critical needs should not be eclipsed by battles on the floor of the United Nations or elsewhere over abortion, a topic for which we will never agree. The United Nations should not be meddling in this issue, nor should other countries. And as the GCD grows in strength, numbers, and influence, genuine health gains for women will expand. The protection of life will grow more ubiquitous, and the vigorous defense of the family will be a foregone conclusion. Together, we are making a difference. The coalition represented by GCD is critical for women's thriving, and it is fundamental to the flourishing of our societies. I'm so appreciative of President Trump and Secretary Azar for prioritizing life over the last 4 years, and heartfelt thanks to the 34 other countries who stepped up and signed the Geneva Consensus Declaration. This is only the beginning. And so to conclude, I'd like to give you the opportunity to view a brand new video that was just posted to our website yesterday, celebrating the Geneva Consensus Declaration, reaffirming the importance of it, and continuing to invite other countries to join. Thank you.
In every human being lies the power to change the world. Each of us embodies the very essence of life, love, and strength. Together, we want the world to know that our commitment to women's health, the family, a nation's sovereignty, and to life is more than just words. It is our everlasting vow, and we must continue to stand united. Signing the Geneva Consensus Declaration was only the first step. It is more important than ever before that together, through these uncertain times, we continue to carry the brilliant torch of these shared ideals and bring this light to all who will listen, proclaiming that we will see the promise we made through until the end, urging all those who are willing to join us. Because when our daughters thrive, our civilizations, nations, and families do too. Together we can make a difference. Together we can be a voice for the voiceless. Together we are stronger.
Thank you very much, Valerie. And thank you for your amazing work on, it really is an historic declaration, and we thank you for that. And we think there's a real role for civil society to play here. We're speaking to their own governments and encouraging them to also come on as a partner. So thank you. We'll move now to our next panelist, Dr. Alma Golden. We thank you, Dr. Alma Golden, for being with us. Alma Golden is Assistant Administrator for Global Health at U.S. Agency for International Development. A pediatrician by training, Dr. Golden has worked in private pediatrics, indigent health services, academic medicine, public health, healthcare administration, and health policy. Dr. Golden also served as presidential appointee from 2002 to 2006 as Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Office of Population Affairs in HHS. Prior to her current role, Dr. Golden served as the Executive Director of USAID's Global Development Lab and Senior Deputy Assistant Administrator in the Bureau for Global Health. In recent weeks, Dr. Golden issued a directive to USAID partners to account for how they monitor compliance with protecting life and global health policy. This is the first time an administration has issued such a comprehensive set of accountability guidelines to assure Mexico City compliance. Dr. Golden, we look forward to hearing from you, and you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good morning. I want to express my appreciation to CFAM and to Lisa and Stefano for arranging this important event and for including me in the discussion. It has been a great honor to serve in this administration and to be the Senate confirmed Assistant Administrator for Global Health. I never would have imagined that possibility. And similar to Valerie's reflections, it's been quite a special opportunity to work on these issues in such an important place. And it is an honor to reflect on President Trump's incredible contributions and investments in the lives of women and girls and families as a whole around the world. I'm also happy to be on the panel along with Valerie and I, and with Katie as well. Valerie and I first worked together almost 20 years ago, and it's been fascinating to collaborate with her, especially over the last 3.5 years. And thanks for showing the video, Valerie. I count the signing of the Geneva Consensus Declaration among the best moments of the last 4 years, and I was thrilled to be able to attend it in person, socially distanced, of course. As Valerie noted, the Geneva Consensus Declaration is much more than a statement of beliefs. We have the opportunity to use this to defend our principles across all United Nations bodies at every multilateral setting, and also informing our own agendas here inside the administration. The declaration is the outcome of the work led by Valerie, and I'm delighted that many of the rest of us had the opportunity to engage in conceptualizing, developing language, and applying some of these truths to the work that we were doing. One of the things that I love in the declaration is the quote that programs are there to improve life, health, dignity, and well-being of women, men, children, and families. Time and time again, the UN has been a forum for member states to assert that abortion was a universal human right, while the life and well-being of women around the world are left to the whims of progressive political agendas, compromising the fabric of the families and communities. I am very proud of the role that USAID has played in championing the health priorities of women and girls globally. Even while my colleagues and I in the Bureau for Global Health were focused on the many life-saving activities that we do through there, and then also fighting the pandemic over this past year, our agency has never wavered in the commitment to women and to life. In May 2020, upon learning that the UN was using the pandemic to call for the widespread distribution of abortion-inducing drugs and abortion supplies, USAID contacted UN Secretary General Gutierrez and urged him to not use the crisis as an opportunity to advance access to abortion as a, quote, essential service. In October, shortly after the signing of the declaration, then Acting Administrator Marshall wrote to the UN on this issue again, calling on them to promote and fulfill an agenda that encourages meaningful contributions to women and their communities and that has a positive and lasting impact for generations to come. USAID remains concerned about these egregious actions and the disconcerting trend that the UN supports as champions of abortion, especially under the guise, as Stefano was referring to, the language of sexual and reproductive health. During this administration, Dr. Wubenhorst and I have been privileged to participate on the boards of various international organizations. Some of these include UNICEF, PAHO, the Global Fund, and several others. In these fora, it is not uncommon for members or member states to promote the dogma of choice as a criteria for funding. It is tragic to recognize that some entities and nations are willing to let children and adults die of malaria or COVID or HIV or other conditions if their conditions of abortion are not met. They are determined that the destruction of unborn children is a prerequisite for funding for other conditions or problems. Of course, no account of the President's commitment to women and girls is better illustrated than through the Protecting Life and Global Health Affairs policy, commonly known as PLGHA. On January the 23rd, 2017, President Trump issued a presidential memorandum reinstating the 2001 presidential memorandum on the Mexico City policy. That one was for USAID family planning assistance. That directive also called on the State Department to implement a plan to extend the requirements of the Mexico City policy to, quote, global health assistance furnished by all departments or agencies. That's the expansion that you heard Lisa refer to earlier. Later that year in May, when the expansion of the policy was approved and became known as PLGHA. Since then, USAID has vigorously implemented this policy, requiring foreign NGOs to agree as a condition of receiving global health assistance that they will not perform or actively promote abortion as a method of family planning. Under this expanded policy, the term global health assistance, as it applies to USAID, encompasses all global health programs, including HIV/AIDS, maternal and child health, infectious diseases, including malaria, tuberculosis, neglected tropical diseases, global health security, as well as family planning and reproductive health care. USAID, while working with our colleagues in the US Departments of State, Defense, and Health and Human Services, have diligently worked to ensure the implementation of PLGHA and have undertaken 2 separate reviews to examine both the benefits and the execution of the policy. As you probably already know, the overwhelming majority of foreign non-governmental organizations that are receiving US global health assistance agreed to the terms of the PLGHA policy. In most cases, when a recipient or subrecipient declined to agree to PLGHA, USAID or their prime partner that was funded successfully transitioned activities to ensure the continuity of our global health programs. In addition, most of the affected awards and subawards did not experience a disruption of healthcare or significant delays. And I am happy to share that the review found that the declinations did not reduce the amount of US health assistance program to any particular country or program. I also want to note that I'm also grateful for the multiple opportunities that we've had through Global Health to interact on PLGHA, particularly with the Hill, with our congressional colleagues, and as well as with foreign countries. We've had multiple opportunities to talk to either individual representatives from individual countries or groups of countries. Especially when engaging with the European nations on this topic, They frequently begin with the phrase, "We support women." It is my privilege to respond. I'm a pediatrician. I'm a grandmother. I love babies. I support children as well as women and families. The policies of this administration have also been expressed in the policies of our approaches, such as the journey to self-reliance, which actually speaks to the increased sovereignty we value through the Geneva Consensus Declaration. We've also worked hard to expand programs and funding to new partners. There's much yet to do, but among those new partners, we see such promise for local organizations, faith-based groups, and other civil society leaders to take on more responsibility around the world and development. I will also note that we recently did an evidence summit looking at working with religious organizations around the world and development. We've also really looked at the concepts of how we write our programs, how we look for compliance, as was mentioned by Lisa in regard to how we have followed up with PLGHA. All of these have been active considerations and aggressively pursued during this administration. We've also led on something fairly new, which actually I'm surprised hasn't been done for years. We've started to conduct pilots on cervical cancer. Many of you are aware that this is a major killer of women around the world, and it occurs, the disease and death often occurs during their child rearing years. It's an important pro-woman activity. Also, under this administration, the use of UNFPA funds has been focused more clearly on the well-being of women and families, healthy timing and spacing of children, and not just contraceptive availability. As the world's largest donor to global health programs, the United States remains committed to helping women and children thrive while also honoring our commitment to protect life. The PLGHA policy and the significant US funding devoted to global health assistance clearly illustrates our priorities, even during COVID. This administration has shown that we can continue to meet our critical global health goals, including providing health care for women and addressing such diseases as HIV/AIDS, while ensuring that US taxpayer funding does not support foreign non-governmental organizations performing or actively promoting abortion as a method of family planning. Thank you for your attention, and I'll close by quoting President Trump, who's already been quoted, by saying, "We will never tire of defending innocent life." Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Golden. We thank you. We're so appreciative for all your hard work in restoring the integrity to global health programs. Our next speaker is Katharine Gorka. Katharine Gorka is the Director of Civil Society and American Dialogue at the Heritage Foundation's Edward J. Feulner Institute. She's a security expert who has trained the FBI, U.S. Army Special Forces, Marine Corps, and law enforcement on irregular warfare and terrorism. Katie served as Senior Advisor in the Office of Policy at the United States Department of Homeland Security from 2017 to 2019, where she focused on prevention of terrorism and targeted violence. While there, she worked on the Trump administration's Women, Peace, and Security strategy. And Katie is a member of the American Council on Women, Peace, and Security. The Women, Peace, and Security Act passed in Congress and was signed by President Trump in 2017. The bill had previously stalled in Congress due to concern that it would be exploited to promote abortion. It passed, tasking the Trump administration with the responsibility of drafting a comprehensive strategy in support of women's leadership in ending wars and building peace. Katie, we look forward to hearing from you on your experience in working on this initiative, preserving it for its intention to help women in fragile and conflict settings. Welcome, and you have the floor.
Okay, thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you, CFAM, for having me and for organizing this. I've actually learned a lot. I really appreciate this gathering and hearing from the others. Sorry. There we go. Okay. I want to say something just before I start. As others have, I really want to express my thanks to President Trump for his leadership, particularly on the pro-life issues, but on so many issues. But I also really want to say I'm incredibly grateful to all the people who came into the administration. I remember, so I served on the Trump transition. I came in about September 2016, and I remember at one of our first meetings turning to people around me and introducing myself and seeing who were these others that have decided to join the administration as volunteers at that stage. And I realized it was many conservatives who saw President Trump as a leader of conservative issues and as somebody who would provide an opportunity to see us advance our priorities and our policies. I think a lot of people don't realize how incredibly hard it is actually to be an appointee. The sacrifices you make, often cut down in salary, and not to mention all the attacks from the press and from your fellow colleagues. So I really am grateful for all of those who made that sacrifice and came in and helped to drive this forward. Honestly, they couldn't have done it without President Trump's leadership, but President Trump couldn't have done it without all of them supporting his policies. I'm not going to name them, but there were people who were incredibly important in this effort, especially women, peace, and security. So let me say something about women, peace, and security, because I think it's one of those things that actually many people are not aware of. It's been around for more than 20 years now. The idea of it came out of Beijing in 1995. And it came out of a growing awareness of the price that women were paying in conflict, and particularly of sexual violence being used as a tool of war. So it had very commendable origins. There was a UN resolutions from the UN Security Council to establish the Women, Peace, and Security Agenda. That was actually 20 years ago, this October. And the idea was particularly to look at the impact of conflict on women and girls, to look at the ways that sexual violence was being used against them, and to sort of help bring an end to that, to help protect them, and also to get women more engaged in the conflict resolution and peace building process. The problem is that from the very beginning, those who were pushing for this and those who were engaged in this generally were from a very left-leaning position. So this was infused from the beginning with sort of identity politics, critical theory talk of oppressor and oppressed. It was anti-family. Men were no longer, valued husbands and fathers. They were the patriarchy. And of course, abortion became central to the agenda. So for the next 20 years, the various NGOs and groups were driving this forward. It was never enacted into law, as Lisa mentioned, here in the United States because of its controversial language on abortion. But when the Trump administration came in, Congress quickly passed a bipartisan bill. The controversial language had been taken out. Bill was passed unanimously, the Women, Peace, and Security Act. And the Trump administration, President Trump signed it into law in October of 2017. And that's when the really interesting work began, because the challenge was, because so many NGOs had been involved with this agenda for so many years, there was tremendous momentum continuing to drive it forward as it had existed. And I would identify sort of two key flaws in the way it was being approached prior to the Trump administration. One was its obsession with abortion. It would not put that aside. And then the other was, it was a very sort of grandiose, ambitious, utopian scheme for how the United States could change the status of women around the world. And I'll just read one line. So it could not be enacted in law, but the Obama administration created 2 national action plans on women, peace, and security. This was essentially, this was bringing it about through executive order, right? Which is always kind of the second best, because executive orders are very easily undone. So let me read one line from the revised National Action Plan. This came out in 2016, just before Trump was elected. The goal of the United States National Action Plan on Women, Peace, and Security remains as simple as it is profound: to empower half of the world's population as equal partners in preventing conflict and building peace, ... So really, we're going to empower half of the world's population? I mean, anybody who's ever been involved in assistance programs knows how hard it is to do anything, even in one country, for us as a foreign power. But they're saying they're going to change half of the world. And keep in mind, this came out, or let me put it this way, I think chronologically it was reverse order. Not too long after, there was a kind of infamous IG report that came out on a USAID assistance program called Promote. Now, that program was supposed to help 75,000 Afghan women get jobs, promotions, apprenticeships, and internships. They had a kingly budget of $280 million. By the time the IG report came out, they assessed maybe 55 Afghan women had gotten better jobs, but they couldn't even actually directly attribute that improvement to this assistance program. So my point is, when it came time to develop a strategy for this new Women, Peace, and Security Act, there were sort of 2 key things that we were looking at. How do we do this in a way that abortion is simply not a part of it, right? And then the other is, how do we do it in a way that the results can be achievable and measurable? So this was so important. And, it's unfortunate, I think, that President Trump's work in foreign assistance has not been talked about enough in general. But I think, one of his big achievements was in scaling it back from the grand utopian nation building schemes of the past and making it more sort of realistic, making it achievable. And this was one of the big successes of the Women, Peace, and Security Act. So, and I think the fact that it was designed this way was one of the reasons both Democrats and Republicans were able to embrace it. So the law, as it was ultimately written, was very straightforward, very simple, with a very clear goal. And I will read this. The objective was simply this: to ensure that the United States promotes the meaningful participation of women in mediation and negotiation processes seeking to prevent, mitigate, or resolve violent conflict. Very simple. So not only was the objective straightforward, but it was based on a growing body of research that had found that where women are involved in the peace building and conflict resolution process, the peace tended to hold longer. So I think it's important, this pared down, this pared back approach was very much in keeping with the principled realism that guided President Trump's national security strategy. His principled realism included rolling back the more adventuresome nation building projects, as I mentioned, and returning to the more achievable and critical goal of defending the nation from foreign enemies. And then, of course, built into that was the commitment to the pro-life policies. But as I said, the really interesting work began after President Trump signed the act into law. His administration had 1 year to develop a strategy and deliver that to Congress. And the problem is, under the Obama administration and in the previous 20 years of the Women, Peace, and Security work, there were at least 40 NGOs brought into the consultation process, including many reproductive rights groups who saw this as a way to press their agenda. And that was like a steam engine that had to be slowed and stopped. And that was very, very difficult. But it happened in the end, and it was successful. The strategy, I won't go into big detail about it, but the strategy, as we've talked about with some of these other things, really affirmed the Trump administration's commitment to the sovereignty of other nations. I want to stress that. Both of my other colleagues have said that, and I think it's so important. It's not for us to go in and tell other countries how to live, that we respect the sovereignty of other nations and we protect life. I want to say this. I think that unfortunately, this fight is now going to begin again. Already I've seen, there's a group called the NGO Working Group on Women, Peace, and Security. It is a project of the left-leaning Tides Center. It's a coalition of 19 international NGOs, and they have already stated this in their 2020 Civil Society Roadmap on Women, Peace, and Security. Dedicated attention to sexual and reproductive health in conflict-affected settings is necessary. So if and when a Biden administration comes in, I think we are going to see a return of this fight. So I would like to say, as we conclude the speaking part of this webinar and go into the questions, I'm so glad that we've had this opportunity to really highlight the achievements of the Trump administration in achieving just profound pro-life goals. Our work as people who will be outside the administration, as members of NGOs, our work is now just beginning, because this fight will return in full force. And so I think we need to work hard to make sure that the gains that have been made are not reversed. And I think part of what that entails is doing a better job of taking our case to the American public. I am telling you, on the women, peace, and security issue, nobody on the right knew what it was. It was purely the domain of the left, and we can't do that anymore. We have to educate our side. We have to do a better job of educating them on the importance of these issues and educating them on what our government it tries to do in violation of the principles of the sanctity of life. So thank you. That's all from me.
Thank you, Katie. That was super interesting and also a little frightening at the end. I think we'll move now. We have a little bit of time to go into our questions and answers segment. I think what I'm going to do is pose a question to each one of our speakers, and then we'll have Valerie start, and then we'll work through just in the same order that our speakers presented. So, but I will give you all 3 questions right now. So to Valerie, the question is, can you share with us some of the challenges that you encountered in recruiting countries to come onto the Geneva Consensus Declaration, and share too if there were also internal problems, internal challenges within the administration, as well as communicating just the essence of what the declaration and the strategy was about. Dr. Golden, the when you first came into USAID, what kind of oversight was there for the Mexico City policy? I know you spoke briefly about the new compliance categories for monitoring Mexico City policy. What happens now with the Biden administration coming in? And what do you think is necessary going forward in a future Republican administration so we don't start from ground zero? And Katie, you touched on this a little bit already, but do you think the Women, Peace, and Security is sufficiently a sound initiative? You said probably not in the next administration. Are there any existing guardrails in US federal law that are going to be important in trying to keep abortion out of Women, Peace, and Security? So Valerie, if you would start, please.
Thanks, Lisa. Very good question, actually. When I started this work, I just initially thought that if countries, for example, had a pro-life constitution or legislation, they would just naturally want to sign on to things like this. But I learned very quickly that that was not necessarily the case, because for years prior to the Trump administration, there had been an aggressive and continuing intimidation and threats made to countries if they dared to be too vocal about their country's stance on life and the family and their right to sovereignty, such that many like-minded countries on these issues were risk averse because they knew what happened when you joined support around these issues. But I also saw something happen as this effort continued. First of all, building relationships can't ever be underestimated. They need to see and recognize that the Trump administration is not merely using these issues as talking points, but we really mean what we say. And we really want to hear from those other countries. We want to understand their geopolitical history. We want to understand the specific nuances in their countries and to work around those. And when they learned that this wasn't just the United States saying, we want to do X, Y, and Z, do it our way and just join on, but rather this is genuinely a collaborative effort where we will all be stronger together, that made a difference. And so when October 22nd, 2020 came around, there had already been a lot of groundwork built, and they saw that the Trump administration was dependable on this issue, that we really cared about these issues, and we cared about them as countries. They were less reticent to join. But I have to tell you that in many of these countries, before they could agree to sign, this went all the way to their president, all the way to their prime minister. This was not made even by a senior level person in that administration in many cases. So that tells you how difficult this is, but it also shows that there is all-in commitment on the part of these countries who did sign on, because at the very highest level, they said, we are willing to do this because it matters.
Thanks so much. I'll go ahead and proceed right quick with the questions that I have. But first, I want to say what an outstanding job Valerie has done. And I think she represented well, and certainly we've lived in global health, sort of the neo-imperialism that has been the approach of those that demanded compliance with their expectations around abortion in order to, as a condition of funding. So I think it's really been important to give countries their voice. In terms of when we were working on Mexico City policy, when I first came in, there was a very significant obstacle around actually understanding who is delivering care. We had problems on getting the lists of our subrecipients and descriptions of their activities. This had not been required by previous administrations. There was this sense that it was fully the responsibility of the primary recipient to manage the subrecipients, and there was an honor system in place for whether or not the subrecipients were complying with a PLGHA or Mexico City policy. Clearly, that was problematic. It took some, and even there were complaints that nobody could ask about the subrecipients because of things like the Paperwork Reduction Act and other things like that. There were just many traditional and bureaucratic obstacles to having visibility. We have been working through a lot of those. We are under the leadership of the front office at USAID, particularly with Bill Steiger, as well as our Office of Inspector General. We've actually opened up the pathway to be able to get all the information on the subrecipients, which is critical in this situation. And the compliance that we requested this fall, after we assured that we had that obstacle taken care of, was to get reporting back from the prime partners in terms of the actual activities they're doing, in terms of informing and monitoring all of their subrecipients in all of their locations related to PLGHA. We are following up on a lot of the information we've recently received. There was a question also about what do we do next? We do have to maintain the lessons learned. Certainly, I have talked with some of my colleagues about how important it is going to be to actually document and maintain those things that we've worked on, particularly in terms of identifying how to get through to the subrecipients, who's responsible. We would love to see contracts as well as awards under the PLGHA. So we are preparing for the future and trying to document and maintain records around the advances and the barriers that we've addressed. So with that, thank you very much. I will turn it over to Katie. Over.
Hey, my answer is very simple. Unfortunately, women, peace, and security can be anything you want it to be. So the guardrails are virtually nil legally, which is why the role of NGOs and individuals will be all the more important. That's all I'm going to say on that. I think we have our work cut out for us and people have to engage on this issue.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure having the three of you. You are heroes to us. The work that you've done can't be understated. We are so appreciative to all you've done. I'm sure it came at personal sacrifice. And we want to thank you again for joining us today. I want to let our webinar audience know that there will be a video available beginning tomorrow on our YouTube channel. And just on behalf of CFAM, I'd just like to thank everybody for joining us today and wish you all a very blessed and joyful Christmas. Thank you. Take care.